Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study. Today is the 21st day of December 2018. Hold on, let me just get this straight. I'm Kurt, I'm your host. And today we're going to talk about Exodus chapter 18. Make sure the bike's all ready to go. I saw something dripping out there earlier. Nothing, looks like it's all ready. So, just a quick disclaimer. I'm a non-believer. Yet I really enjoy studying the Bible. And today we're going to take a shortcut up and over the mountains. The same shortcut I took last time I did this. It seems like I'm doing these Bible studies more and more on my Fridays on. I think that's what it was. Was that 2 weeks ago? Has it been 2 weeks with such a short chapter? Amazing. I'm spending a lot of time on these things. So yeah, even though I don't believe the stories, I do certainly enjoy study, and I study so that I know, so that I understand, that I have an informed perspective, and I am open to having my mind changed. Although I'm open from the perspective of a skeptic and an atheist. So just like if someone's to hand you, I'm referring to you as maybe the Christian you, a book of the Quran and asked you to please read this. You know, maybe a Muslim person did that, asking you to read it in order to, they're hoping to win you over, of course. But you're going to read that book as a Christian. You can't, they might get upset at you, they might get frustrated and think you're not reading it right. You know, you need to read it like a Muslim. Read it like a Muslim believer, and then the truth will, be clear to you. Now, wouldn't that be an absurd statement? I wouldn't expect a Christian to be able to put themselves into the frame of mind of a believer. A true believer of the Muslim faith as a means of understanding the book of the Quran. Likewise, that's the same position I'm in. So, though I say that I'm trying to be open-minded on this, that is to the extent that I can do so as a non-believer. I hope that's fair and clear. And of course, at all times, I'll try to be respectful, although it's hard for me to contain myself a little bit when things really seem absurd. I hope you'll understand that as well. So let's get to it. I've got the helmet all sealed up right now. It's almost claustrophobic. This helmet is so good that when it's all sealed up, it's like being in a can. In Exodus 18, oh, this person just blew right through. In Exodus 18, Moses has led the children of Israel, all 2 to 3 million of them, to the mountain of God. To the mountain of God. This is the place where the Ten Commandments will be given. And they've encamped there at the foot of the mountain. And as we know from Exodus 17, there was no water when they got there. And so the miracle occurred with Moses' sapphire staff, in which he was able to draw water from the mountain, draw water from the stone, literally. So at this point now, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, hears of, in his land, in Midian, he hears of all that's happened to Moses and the people of Israel, and most particularly God's miracles and God's favor to Moses. So he gathers his daughter, Zipporah, who is Moses' wife, and the 2 children that Moses has had with Zipporah. I can't remember their names. Was one Eleazar, maybe? One, I think it means that, and that name means, or whatever name it was, means because I was in a foreign land or something like that. And then the other son too. He gathers them, and they go off from Midian to visit Moses. And when they arrive, he's announced to Moses that the father-in-law of Moses has arrived. And in the naming, in the identification as the father-in-law of Moses, that there's some honor being given to Moses in that regard, because he's kind of like saying the king's father-in-law. And I read that in the Jewish scholarship that I read, the commentary of Rabbi Rashi. Excuse me. So Moses comes out to meet Jethro, and they bow down to one another equally. So apparently they both, it says that he bowed down, but it doesn't say who bowed down. Was it Jethro bowing down to Moses, or was Moses bowing down to Jethro? So the Jewish scholars have come to some consensus that it's basically they bowed down to each other as kind of like equals, which is a curious thing given that Moses is the prophet of the God of Abraham, and guess what? So is Jethro, kind of, because he's basically Moses' cousin, being a Midianite. They were also of the line of the sons of Abraham by way of the hairy boy. No, I got that confused with the last chapter. Anyway, so they're cousins in a way, but it's okay. I'm mixing things up. I'm muddying the waters. Jethro is a pagan priest, so he's not equal in that capacity, right? The Midianites worship many gods. Among those gods is El, aka Baal, the mountain god, storm god, whatever you want to call him, and his wife Asherah, who kind of mix things up here, encountering this chapter. This is the chapter where I encounter the concept of God having a wife, and I'll get into that in just a second. But Jethro now is Jethro and Moses are together. Jethro is the priest of Midian, the priest of many gods, including Yahweh, not just by way of his name Baal or El, but by way of his name Yahweh. By this time, the Canaanites, which include the Midianites, are worshiping Yahweh. They've changed El and Baal's name to Yahweh, and that's a thing. So they were actually worshiping the same God. The difference being that Jethro worships a bunch of other gods as well. I'm of the opinion, from what I've been reading, that Moses was probably worshiping them as well. But it wasn't until later, after the second temple was rebuilt, that the priestly class were the ones that modified the Bible in such a way as to give the impression of monotheism. It's just the one God, Yahweh. So I'd say they were probably equals at this point. Except Moses clearly being a prophet who is in the company of God, who's right there in the camp. God's right there as the pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. So they sit down, they talk, and Moses relates to Jethro everything that's happened to them, all the wonders and all of God's punishments unto Egypt, everything from the plagues to the parting of the Red Sea and this, the waters coming back upon the Egyptians, and all the miracles that happened along the way in the wilderness of sin on their way to the mountain of God. And in the evening, Moses summons the elders, and they'll have dinner with Jethro. The Jewish rabbis point out that Moses actually was the servant at that point, at that dinner. He actually stood at the table and dished out the food. I mean, it doesn't say anything about this in the Bible. I don't know where they got that idea, but that Moses was actually, okay, would you like a second helping? Or do you want fries with that? Sorry, I couldn't resist. So that's what Moses was up to. And anyway, they sit down and they have a nice evening. And the very next day, Jethro wakes up, comes out of his tent, and he finds Moses assembled outside in the early morning with a long line of people waiting to talk to him. And these are people with issues, cases, something that needs to be settled. And they're coming to Moses to act the part of a judge and to give them judgment over their particular issues. And that goes on all day and into the evening until at the end of the day, Moses is, he's pooped, right? He's been doing this all day, and apparently this is something he does almost every day. Jethro is kind of astonished. He's like, whoa, Moses, what is up with this? And Moses says, well, the people come to me. They want to know the word of God, the judgment of God on their issues. And Moses is the only one. Of course, Moses, we're learning more and more that Moses is probably privy to the ordinances that will become the Mosaic Law. God appears to have been sharing that with him, although he's keeping it to himself. And we're going to learn eventually that he'll be instructed to write those down, or to help God write them down in the form of the Ten Commandments and other laws. So Jethro's like, No, whoa. This is not a good idea. I mean, you're going to wear yourself out keeping this up, Moses. I think it's time for you to listen to my advice, and I got some good suggestions I want to share with you. Okay, first of all, here's what you need to do. You need to share this responsibility among the people, and there's 2 to 3 million, people here. There's no way one man can serve as judge for all. So what you need to do is you need to select, able men to serve in the role of judges. Now, in the Torah, which is, of course, as original as it gets, the qualifications are interesting. I'm doing it off of memory. I can't remember exactly. I actually made up a little chart that showed the differences, because I noticed that there was a difference in the qualifications between the Torah, the King James edition of the Bible, and the New International edition. Some of the things were the same, such as they needed to be honest men in all cases. They needed to be, that's the only one I can remember. There was honest and a few other things, but where it differed were in the Torah it said they need to be wealthy men of substance. And I actually looked it up. What does that substance mean? I thought, does that mean that they're substantive in terms of good character? And no, the Jewish interpretation of that is that they are men of wealth, that they have money, so that they can't be bribed. They're above corruption. But it also said in the Torah that it's 3 lines down, it said they also need to be men of who hate wealth, who hate the accumulation of wealth. Well, that's a curious thing. How do you find rich men who hate the accumulation of wealth? And again, it was back to the same thing, that it says that so that they're not susceptible to bribery and the like. I guess it kind of makes sense, but in some ways it doesn't. If you interpret it that way, that they're wealthy men who don't care to add to their fortune, then that kind of makes sense. But that seems like a stretch. I think the Torah could have been clearer. Maybe it is in ancient Hebrew. I don't know. But the other 2 versions, the King James and the NIV, there was in the King James, I think it said that these need to be men who hate covetousness. Or maybe that was the NIV. Which is curious. What's this thing with covetousness? That's the 10th Commandment, right? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's, ass or wife or whatever. Why is that such a sin? Isn't it the very thing that drives our economies forward? It's like you see somebody with something better than you've got, and well, by gosh, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and work hard and get one of those too. Keeping up with the Joneses. I can see thou shalt not steal, but thou shalt not covet? I don't know. So that's one of the qualities. And there was another one, what was it, that was only found in one of them, and I can't remember. The point being, you'd think that if Jethro is going to give Moses a listing of the characteristics that we need in a competent judge to preside and rule over Israel, or to judge over Israel, then you think that list would be pretty straightforward, and it would be consistent amongst all the different versions of the Bible. That's a pretty important thing. I mean, what if we decided to set up our civil courts here to be religious courts, and we wanted to pick men, you women can't get involved. As per the Bible, if they wanted to set up men to be judges, which of those 3 are we going to choose? There's nothing about the wealth in the King James or the NIV editions. You could have a poor man as a judge, as long as he's not covetous. Go figure. It depends again which of those 2 Bibles you're reading, King James or NIV. So you get the point, right? So that's what Jethro says. You need to pick men to act in your stead. And so what they'll do is they'll handle the lesser things, and just like on any kind of a court of justice, the greater or the more difficult or challenging or consequential issues will then filter up eventually to Moses. So Moses will only take care of the most important things, kind of like acting like a Supreme Court in a way. So furthermore, it says, Jethro says, you shall appoint men to rule over thousands. You will appoint men to rule over hundreds. You will appoint men to rule over tens. Now, if you do the math with 62,000 males that came out of Egypt, I didn't do the math, but the Jewish scholars did, and I read it, and it comes up to like 76,600 men to rule over Israel. Now, we can get out. That seems like a lot of work. Okay, we just had in the United States, we just picked a new Supreme Court justice. That was one. And boy, the fight that we had for that. Well, of course, we don't have a fight. It's Moses who gets to pick. But that's the point. Did Moses pick all 76,600? Now, first I was thinking, well, no, of course he didn't. He just picked the rulers of thousands, which would be 62. That would be 62 men, right? That's a much more reasonable choice. And then from there, those 62 men will choose their hundreds, rulers of hundreds, and those rulers of hundreds would in turn pick their rulers of tens, right? There you go. And that's a good way to do it. But no, that's not what it says in the Bible. It's very clear in two sections that Jethro says, this is a job for you, Moses. And then elsewhere it says, Moses did this thing. So it looks like it was all on Moses' shoulder. Can you imagine that? I guess he had to interview all 62, and I may be wrong, maybe it was 62,000 men, and pick 620,000 men, and then pick from those 62,000 rulers or whatever it was. I'm all confused. 67,600. It's a mess. Anyway, I don't think this happened. Okay, and it does say that the Holy Ghost was involved, so maybe he got some divine assistance. Still, no, I'm not buying it. I think this is a story, and more evidence that this is a story. So at the end of that, then Moses has picked his judges. Jethro is, happy because he's been helpful. And the chapter ends with Jethro simply saying, or the narrator of the Bible simply saying that Moses went on and carried on, right? Now they're at the foot of God, and what's coming next soon is the actual ascent up onto the mountain to get the Ten Commandments. But before we go there, I've started a little diversion in my Bible study, and this came about when I read, where was it that I first encountered this? The idea that God has a wife. Gosh darn it, I can't remember. It was during my study of Exodus 18, and it wasn't someplace, secondary or, some commentary. It was a pretty serious source, enough to make me take it seriously. The idea that God might have a wife. So I posted it on Facebook, on my Freeway Bible study page, and shared that on my main page as well. And I got 3 responses, all of them from, one of them might be from a Jewish man, but the other 2 or 3 from Christians. And the one comment said, Kurt, you're confused. The other one said, Kurt, you're off the mark. And the third one said, was a threat. It was saying, watch out. And I tried to get more about that. Well, what am I supposed to watch out for? And it just said, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, which is, I've been getting a lot of that lately. Anytime I seem to, take a discussion on Facebook on this stuff to a point where there's, and I'm not trying to box people into a corner, I'm just trying to get an answer. And when they seem to run out of answers, I get this a lot lately, is, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, that kind of stuff. Literally, that's what it is. It's like a throwing up a wall of impressive proclamations. I also got that. I remember getting that a couple months back from one person who would respond and use God's name in all uppercase letters, and I think it was like expressions too, like, oh Lord, and if you said it really loud in all caps, it would, shut me up or get the point across, which doesn't work. That just, to me, is what I've lately been referring to is retreating back to the home of faith, that cave in the desert that I found, where you can go to escape the elements, escape basically anything that might assault the status quo. And I consider basically, when now I'm seeing it, whenever I see signs of that the person I'm talking to is entering the home of faith, I basically consider that the argument is over. And likewise, now I'm on the alert for any signs that I myself might be entering the home of faith, because that would tell me that my arguments are on an unstable footing. So anyway, so I looked into it. I said, what I wanted to say was, the one thing that was interesting about these 3 comments is all 3 of them were dismissive, and one was including one was an out-and-out threat. Not one of them asked me why I said that, and for the life of me, I wish I could remember why I said that, because it was a good bit of research that I did. I think it was maybe actually in my NIV Bible itself, in the commentary that comes along with it. That might have been where it mentioned Asherah, the wife of God. But no one asked me that. No one said, "Hey, Kurt, well, that's that's kind of a weird thing to say. Well, why do you say that?" That took me aback, because that reveals a very different thinking pattern than what I'm used to, which is I prefer, if someone says something absurd, I'm going to ask them, why did you say that? I'm going to give them a chance to make a case, and if it looks like it's nonsense, then I'll dismiss it as such and move on. But if it isn't nonsense, what if they have a good answer? What if they have come on in, buddy. What if they have a really good reason for what they said? I'd want to know that. Even if it rocked my world. Especially if it rocked my world. Well, why wasn't anybody asking me that? Do I just seem so lacking in credibility, or uninteresting, or am I just so dismissed at this point in my Bible study that it's not even worth asking the question? That's a possibility. I don't think that's the case, though. I think it's the case that they don't want to know. So I decided I was going to look into it further. So I discovered there's a book called Did God Have a Wife? Quite an inflammatory title, in fact. And it's by I can't remember his name, but he's an archaeologist. And he basically, in this book, makes the case that God indeed have a wife. So I bought the book, and it wasn't cheap. It was like $25. And I'm reading it, and I'm almost done with the 3rd chapter. And at the end of every chapter, I'm summarizing what I learn in each chapter on Facebook. And I'm going to see where this leads. Now, I'm not saying at this point that God, in fact, did have a wife. Of course, I don't think God is real anyway. But, at least in the mythology that God had a wife. But I'm open to the idea, and I can't wait to find out. And I want to understand so I can, if it is the case, that I can remember and relate it clearly to make or break this idea. And if it's true, then wow. I'll hold off getting into any of the details, but I think I understand the overall picture that's being painted here, and it's compelling, and it's something that would give me pause were I a believer. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and end next to this nice old Tesla. It's kind of an old one because you can see it's got the Access OK stickers on the side. They're not giving those out anymore, I don't think, for the new Teslas, because there's so many of them. That means that they can ride on the express route, which is right over there. Why aren't you over there, buddy? I don't know. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful day, and make it a good life. Take care. Until next time.